magic wand! Make my Goldar grow!
I am a big believer in going into games with the right expectations. A game that takes 2 years to develop is going to have to make some sacrifices somewhere that a game with a 5-year development cycle didn't. Games with smaller budgets and quicker development cycles are important. If every single game that came out needed to be on the same level as Red Dead Redemption 2 or Cyberpunk 2077, then we'd only get about 40 games total per console generation because these games take an extraordinarily long time to make. But where does Pokemon come into this? Well, Pokemon Sword and Shield was developed in around 2 years as far as we know, and it shows. That isn't either a good or bad thing, and it was mostly what I expected. Even Pokemon at its worst is generally an enjoyable experience. So knowing that Sword and Shield was going to have to make sacrifices in some areas in order to focus on others, it's a fine game. It's just that there are some things I wish the series had made progress with in this first real core Pokemon title on a home console, but we'll talk about that more in a minute. I'd feel a bit silly doing a summary of what Pokemon Shield is because, well, it's a Pokemon game. It's a monster collecting RPG. The story starts off a bit back to basics, but quickly moves into the kind of world peril thing that modern Pokemon has been doing. You'll make your way across the new Galar continent, capturing Pokemon and battling gym leaders for badges in order to challenge the Galar champion. Notable new additions to this Pokemon entry are Dynamax Pokemon and the Wild Area. Dynamax works like a lot of other additional mechanics that were used in various other entries, like Mega Evolution, but I do like this take a lot more than previous attempts at additional mechanics, mainly because this one applies to all Pokemon, not just specific ones who get Mega Evolutions or Z moves. It is a lot more limited in terms of use though, since you can only Dynamax a Pokemon in certain battles, mainly gym battles and in Pokemon raids out in the wild area. This kind of makes sense because Dynamaxing is essentially doing your best Rita Repulsa impression and turning your Pokemon into a giant version of itself. They get new moves and some Pokemon even get brand new looks or forms. The wild area is a much larger, more open area than we're used to in Pokemon. There are still towns connected by a series of routes, or routes, however you want to say it, but right in the middle of the region is the wild area, which also connects some of the major towns. There are tons of Pokemon in the wild area, and different Pokemon appear depending on the weather, time of day, and other factors. This is also where you can team up with a group of other players, either online or locally, to battle a wild Dynamax Pokemon. You get a limited number of moves to defeat it, but if you defeat it, you'll have the option to try and catch it. You can also do these raid battles with a group of NPC trainers, but half the time I get some weirdo with a level 50 Magikarp that only uses Hydro Pump, which constantly misses, so your success with NPCs will vary. Now, you can't talk about what's been added to Pokemon Sword and Shield without talking about what has been taken away. There is no national Pokedex, but what does that mean? Well, it means that there are around 400 Pokemon you cannot transfer into the game under any circumstance. Their data just doesn't exist. I personally do feel this has been blown just a little out of proportion. Nobody is really upset that 400 Pokemon aren't in the game. They're upset that their favorite didn't make the cut. At most, you're upset that a handful of Pokemon aren't in the game. But even then, what does it really affect? For the vast majority of players, Sword and Shield won't feel like it's had any Pokemon removed because it has a sizable regional Pokedex and the progression of the game plays out almost identically to previous entries. Even in Ultra Sun and Moon, you couldn't catch all 800 or whatever Pokemon in the game. You needed to transfer at least half of them from previous games. So functionally, there is no difference until post-game when you might have previously transferred your competitive viable Pokemon over for competitive battles, where now you'll be restricted to the 400-ish Pokemon in the Galar regional Pokedex. I can certainly see why some people might be disappointed that a lot of their favorites didn't make the cut, but I can honestly say that it didn't really affect me at all, and not because all my favorites made the cut. On the contrary, a lot of them didn't. Rather, it's because the way I play Pokemon games, especially new Pokemon games, isn't impacted at all by the lack of a national dex. Pretty much the last thing I want to do in a new Pokemon game is use old Pokemon, and that especially applies to ones that are already high level that I could transfer in. I want to see all the new Pokemon, I want to use the new Pokemon, and maybe I'll stumble across an old favorite as part of the regional dex and add it to my team. This does sort of segue into a common complaint I've seen about the game, and that is that it's too easy. Pokemon has always been a kind of make your own difficulty game though, because the difficulty really comes down to your team of Pokemon. I heard someone say that the game was too easy because they were able to get a Gyarados with leftovers before the third gym. Well, who's forcing you to use a Gyarados with leftovers? Personally, I cannot think of a Pokemon I want to use less than Gyarados, other than maybe Pikachu or Charizard. I've had enough of these Pokemon in their last 450,000 game appearances. I don't think a Pokemon game will ever truly be hard, but you can certainly be tested by some of the battles in Pokemon Sword and Shield, depending on the makeup of your team. Marnie's Croagunk wrecked 3/4 of my team the second time I battled her because I just wasn't prepared for it. I had no good counters, and my most powerful Pokemon, Inteleon, was rendered almost useless thanks to Croagunk's dry skin ability. To quickly address another common complaint I've seen, I don't find the game to be significantly shorter than most other Pokemon games. My playthrough to the end credits was 32 hours, and I haven't completed the post-game questline to catch one of the legendary doggos yet either. Now though, I want to talk about the issues I do actually have with Pokemon Shield, but it's not really about what the game does or offers, it's more about what the game doesn't do. This clashes a little bit with my statement earlier about having the right expectations and judging a game accordingly, based on the time it was given and developmental factors like that. I don't necessarily have a problem with the game not having everything I want, but I'm certainly a little disappointed with what is given priority. With limited development time, there are just certain things I prefer Game Freak to work on than the things they generally do. Take Dynamaxing for example. I don't need it and I don't really want it, at least not over other things. I don't need a story that turns into a save the world or save the region type deal halfway through. I don't need new gimmick mechanics. What I do want is the Pokemon to have real voices like Pikachu and Eevee do. Hell, I want voice acting in general, at least for the cutscenes. And something this game is just screaming for is a Pokedex like the one in the anime. Every time I caught a Pokemon and the screen transitioned to the Pokedex view, I was sitting there waiting for the Pokedex to start talking.
Steelix, the Iron Snake Pokemon. It is thought its body transformed as a result of iron accumulating internally from swallowing soil.
But of course, that never came. The stuff I want Game Freak to spend their time developing is stuff that I imagined the Pokemon series would have in the future all the way back when I was playing Red and Blue and Gold and Silver 20 odd years ago. They've done some really great things in recent years to make Pokemon games feel more alive and more real. Having wild Pokemon out in the wild, visibly running, swimming, flying. This was something most of us expected the future of Pokemon to look like someday, and it's more stuff like this that I want to see in Pokemon now that they are technologically very achievable features. I would have preferred Pokemon Sword and Shield go back to basics all the way. Give us a Pokemon story of old. Make it a personal story of growth and ambition. Just make it about wanting to catch, raise, and battle Pokemon to become the very best. Don't bother with gimmick mechanics like Dynamaxing, and spend time expanding and refining the wild area, giving us real Pokemon voices and a real Pokedex, and making other improvements to the very solid core mechanics. This is why the title of the video is what it is. Pokemon Shield is a fine game, it's a fun game, it's a game I can easily recommend, but I can't help but feel a little disappointed by the absence of advancements I've been wanting and expecting for years and years. It could certainly be worse, but it could also certainly be a lot better. I just hope the Pokemon Company give Game Freak enough time to really blow our minds with the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all soon.
Thanks for the like